Want me to do? You want me to switch it to 2? I'm on 2 if you want to key up.
Pass these out before.
Yeah, go, yes, please do that, yeah.
It's somewhere.
Thank you.
Peter.
Is anything
so you
different than
remember my name?
last time?
There's a couple.
Top of mine says county municipality schools, and it says Wilson County Precinct 2.
Okay.
But for the most part, it's materially the same.
Radio test on Precinct 2 channel.
Thank you.
Get one of his guys to go, what?
Okay.
I heard you talking and I called you one day and you didn't answer, but one of your guys did because you were stepping out to do an interview for somebody. And
I wasn't in my truck.
even, yeah, you might,
Okay. I will have it go to the shop.
Because he keeps getting their own spikes.
Hey, you probably.
is there money involved for us? Okay, then do what you feel then.
Because I could just hear that. You maintained my road again yesterday.
Okay, we're back from recess, back in the regular session for today's Commissioners Court. We have agenda item number 22, and that person presenting, oh, we're waiting for Gary. Okay,
Said he would step out for a minute.
well, let's just wait. Here he is. Okay, for the minutes, we have a quorum, full quorum, everybody, all court members are here. All right, agenda item number 22, Commissioner King, we have a presentation by Evan Horn and Samsung Best for the Marcelina project presentation.
Mr. Warner, if you, sure.
Good afternoon. Great to see y'all again. Hope y'all have had a good morning. Figured, Commissioner King, thank you so much for at least just setting up this opportunity. I think the last time that I saw y'all, about 6 to 8 weeks ago, I know it was a big agenda that y'all had that day and was obviously a chance for us to share a little bit about the project, a little bit about the financials behind it, what it could mean for the county. But I think clearly there were a lot of questions that, we just wanted to use this opportunity when there weren't agenda items behind us to kind of get those questions answered. So I've also since then, kind of taken some of the feedback and the questions that you had about that presentation and added some additional documentation that'll hopefully provide some clarity to that. But again, kind of by way of introduction, I'm Evan Horn. I work for Ernst & Young, based out of Salado, and I'm supporting kind of the Samsung team, mainly not on the on-the-ground land development. That's what Saul's here for, to answer some questions. Saul's here from the Samsung team today, too, to answer any questions about the property, et cetera. But again, I kind of support them more from like a tax due diligence and a financial perspective as they're evaluating projects here in Texas, but also kind of across the country. So Saul, though, since it's your first time, I'll let you introduce yourself as well.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Saul Stroud. I am a project developer with Samsung. I was the one to secure the lease with Mr. Albert here in Wilson County. So I'm happy to be here.
Well, great. Well, I figure what we'll do, at least I'll just kind of step back. I know y'all have seen this before, but just, for everybody's sake and for the recording as well, kind of walk through what the project is that we're talking about here. Again, we're calling it, this is, being developed by kind of Samsung's infrastructure group, not the one that does the chip fabrications and other things that you've probably heard about up in the Taylor area, different group, but obviously focused on kind of just large infrastructure developments. And what they have been and what Saul's been developing here in the county is what we're calling the Marcelina Battery Energy Storage System. So again, what this is, what I've likened it to, you can see a kind of a physical depiction on what some of these battery banks look like. But just imagine on about a 20 to 40 acre site, you're going to see rows and columns of these battery storage containment systems here. And what they do is they operate kind of what I've described it as before as the pacemaker of the grid, right? They are there to maintain frequency, stability, add energy, and take energy off of the grid when it is needed and not needed. And so again, it does not generate electricity. It does not just store energy from one particular source, right? Just whatever electrons that are out there on the line, whether they were generated by a natural gas-fired power plant to a solar farm or whatever, right? It's just going to store that energy regardless of source. So with that being the system, again, these systems are anticipated to at least operate for at least 20 years. As you can imagine, as batteries degrade over time, what they then do is just take the old batteries out, put new batteries in, right, in order to maintain efficiency throughout its 20-year life. I'll let Saul talk about its particular location when we get to the map here in a little bit. But as I mentioned, right, this is lithium-ion batteries, just similar that you've got in your cell phones here, that you use in your laptops, but obviously on an industrial scale. What it means for timing, right, that, the earliest that they could start construction would be in the second quarter of next year. So what that means from a tax perspective is that the earliest that this could hit the rolls in any fashion would be tax year 2025. But it may not be operational by that date. It's usually about a 12 to 18 months, kind of depending on weather, equipment procurement, and other things that can obviously flex the timeline. But ultimately, we're targeting about a 12-month construction schedule, and this could be operational in the second quarter of 2025. What it means for the size that we're talking about here, again, this is a 200 megawatt, 2-hour facility, so it has the ability to store upwards of 400 megawatt hours of energy, which at any given time is enough to power tens of thousands of homes, right? So again, very industrial scale, used to support not only the local needs here, but obviously broader needs in the San Antonio and Austin area as well. During the construction schedule, you're going to see, dozens of construction workers that are going to be involved with this for that kind of 12-month period of time. But what you can see here is most of these facilities are self-contained. So it's not going to result in a lot of full-time jobs. What we're expecting is about one full-time job following operations. That being said, even though it doesn't bring a lot of full-time jobs, it really requires almost nothing from county services. It's not going to have any, major water needs other than construction, which we'll talk about, road use agreements, not going to have any impact on county roads, once it's operational. And obviously it generates little to no noise. And being located next to a substation, once you see one of these and you see it next to, an electrical substation, once you see it once, it just blends in with the rest of it. So shouldn't have any impact on, neighboring landowners, any questions, about that. And obviously it doesn't emit, any sort of pollutants either. Should it be built, right? Again, kind of what it would mean to the county, and one of the things we wanted to talk about is this kind of 200 megawatt, 2-hour size battery that we've been talking about. We think, the first year after operations would result in about $140 million in property tax values. So very unique, right? Like I said, on this small kind of 20-ish acre site, you could see upwards of $140 million of property tax investment on that small amount of acreage. So like I said, very unique, not really anything else like it that's out there. And so the second chart, which I know, Judge, you had some questions about too, which I will go into more details on a separate one. What we're projecting, right, what this chart says is first on the left, right? This is estimating just a 20-year estimate of property tax values. And across 20 years, you're looking at about $14 million paid to all of the taxing jurisdictions, including the small portion amount of taxes that would be paid on the land, right? So again, that includes Poth ISD, the county, the Emergency Services District, the River Authority, and the Water Conservation District, as well as Wilson Hospital District. What we then do is just kind of draw that comparison, right, is to what would those same taxing jurisdictions over that same period of time collect if the battery storage facility was not built, right? So that's, $20,000 over a 20-year period. If you look at the tax rate breakdown, if for, easy purposes, you assume that Wilson County is half that rate, which it isn't, it's, slightly less, but that's about $10,000 over a 20-year period that Wilson County would collect on the land. We then kind of just draw that out so you can see kind of what that means for Wilson County in particular, all right? Of that 14-ish million, about 10 million of it is Poth ISD, which should come as no surprise, as, they carry, almost 2/3 of the rate, followed by Wilson County, and then the smaller taxing jurisdictions. So I know some of the questions is how was the Wilson County? We obviously note some abatement terms and some other kind of questions that have along that, and I'm going to go through all of that. But I figure before I do that, I'd at least turn it over to Saul. We can go over kind of just the general location, kind of development efforts to date, and then talk, see if you've got any questions about the project itself before I jump into some of the numbers.
Journal location, it's in McCoy. I don't know off the top of my head the abstract, where it's exactly located. It was off of 541. Yeah, and so what we will do is essentially, the project size that's a 27-acre triangle on Mr. Albert's land, and we will construct the batteries, or put the project site within that triangle. We're also going to have to build a substation on the land as well, which is not highlighted here. We have not reached the agreement with him yet. However, we are in negotiations for that. We will connect to the 345 transmission line that goes across. It pretty much goes across the north end of the triangle. Do you guys have any specific questions about the project?
So this is off 2505 or off of Highway 541?
2505 is his, I guess that's.
His address.
His address, yes, sir. This is we would enter off of 541.
Okay, that's what I was asking, just to make sure that we're clear. So there you are coming off the FM 541.
What is the life expectancy of these batteries?
At least 20 years, right? So that's why
Have to change the batteries out?
so sometimes they might, but we imagine the system as a whole, right? Assist the system as a whole.
I got
Oh,
the
sorry,
system as
yeah.
a whole, but
For the batteries specifically, it's a more or less 10-year term for the batteries. And we will have to recycle those as they wear out their useful life. We will replace as needed.
replace them maybe once in a lifetime.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay.
And what's kind of unknown, a lot of people, it's kind of just playing out in real time. The question is those batteries, even after, let's say, the your life that Saul mentioned, they still work, right? They're just not as efficient, just like any other, battery that we're used to seeing. So the real question, though, becomes is, do they just add more batteries, right, to just maintain the overall storage capacity of the system? Or do they just replace the ones that aren't performing to the level that they are? So again, there's not a one-size-fits-all answer. The answer for this is going to be very dependent upon kind of what market conditions are at the time as well. So like I said, lots of different things being explored, but thankfully, again, what that means to you is either remaining value stays and more value gets added on to that, right? So the tranche gets bigger, or just the stuff that's depreciated isn't working gets replaced with newer stuff anyways, which then results in more value too.
What happens after 20 years?
Yeah, so obviously, the hope is that it's going to continue on, right? What we've seen for just other forms of development, when you've got secured leases with extended lease options, you've got an interconnection position with a substation and all this investment that's occurred at the time, very rarely is the answer just let's decommission everything, which is a protection that the landowner has within those agreements, as well as kind of state statutes that do that, should the landowner not want to continue the lease. But should they want to continue the lease, then you basically you have all of the infrastructure there necessary to continue on with whatever is going to replace battery storage in 20 years, right? Whatever new battery technology or whatever might be there to continue kind of supporting the overall grid. But let's say if he doesn't want to continue, then obviously we've got to return the site to the same condition that it was before construction started.
So one of the questions we had last time was about, we were discussing fire safety. And so that is a question we have. And then also, part of it is to inform you too, that this morning that we had we adopted the International Fire Code 2021 this morning.
Okay.
In the process of working through that. So specifically, does the design today currently meet those standards? Or do you know?
Do you know the answer off the top of your head?
Off the top of my head, I do not know.
Okay.
That's something we're going to have to get back to you.
So, but again, this was adoption y'all just made this morning, so clearly what we can then do review that, show you the standards that the facility was going to meet, and in every case, does it meet or exceed the guidelines that you just adopted? I know we talked about that at length. Again, it's, nobody wants to see, $140 million of investment go on fire, so there are, an extreme list of protections and things that we go through. But all the while, right, we have to meet or exceed what county restrictions are, or just guidelines and rules are too. So maybe that might be the next best step, is we can get a copy of those, and then just for everything that applies to a project like ours, we can show how we meet or exceed it, or if there is a discrepancy, obviously explain that to y'all as well.
And y'all are gonna start, if this works out, y'all are starting the project in March.
That's the earliest that they could start.
Earliest?
Yep.
And there was talk earlier in court that, about adopting a 2024.
Right,
Which
if
is
it- yeah,
on the
it's-
books right now to get approved.
Right, but it's not, it hasn't been published, so it's not enforceable. So you might want to look at the 2024
That's all I
also,
bring it up.
because as soon as it's available for adoption, we'll probably move up to that. And I understand there's some additional requirements for life safety in that over what the 2021 is.
Battery storage was one of them, right?
Yeah.
The number one, actually.
Yeah.
Okay. Is there a timeline on when those 2024 guidelines are supposed to be out, just
Well,
for discussion
this month.
purposes? Oh, this month? Okay.
but they have to actually be published, and they were supposed to have been published in September. We checked last week, and they weren't published yet, but they keep saying November, so we'll see.
And did the court, with the 2021 guidelines that were out, did you just, establish them on their face, or did y'all make any,
No, there's no amendments.
deviations or amendments for the county? Okay.
Yep.
So we would naturally assume that you would probably do the same thing for the 2024?
Yeah, at this point, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
How long has this technology been around? Has this been used for some time, or is this relatively new?
In the grand scheme of things, new, but utility scale battery energy storage has been in place probably for the last 6 to 7 years. And to this scale, where you're talking 100 megawatts or more, I think there's been facilities in Texas that have now been in operations for at least 2 years. So in other locations, it's been, earlier than that, but really coming onto the ERCOT grid here in Texas, the last 2 years, there's been a rapid expansion of this.
Still fairly new.
Yes, sir. Yeah.
Any issues with those that have been put on in the last 2 years?
I haven't seen anything. Obviously, if you Google, again, we talk about fires, right? That to say that there's never been an event ever at a battery energy storage system, I don't think is a true statement. But I haven't seen anything with this latest rapid expansion of these newer, larger facilities in Texas. I haven't seen any, issues of events. And from what we can tell, obviously, Samsung continues to divide it. It's a huge need here, right? As we have transmission capacity issues, that's the biggest thing too, right? We just simply don't have enough transmission lines to support the demand of the energy that we need to bring on new forms of generation. So what battery energy storage is doing is really helping us just kind of fill that gap as new transmission lines actually get constructed. Because again, it can take energy, it can only support so much electricity on the grid, so as there's too much, it can take it off and bring it back on when there is a need. Yes, Judge?
You're asking for an abatement on that?
Yeah, so again, one of the requests that we would have with the court to at least consider, we've kind of gone through kind of historical policy, and I think, Judge, you even mentioned that there have been maybe some other developers that kind of have come and gone. There have been some level of conversation. But one of the things, as part of the presentation that I highlighted when I was here last, was property taxes are the highest annual operating expense for a facility like this. So when Samsung is comparing locations, whether that's internally to them to make final investment decisions, or even competing with other players on the market that are also looking to put battery storage in other locations, property taxes is front and center. And so what I wanted to do is, if you have, does everybody have this chart here, right? This is effectively just a kind of additional detail that goes back to the presentation that I provided here. So again, what we're talking about here at first is just kind of a 20-year estimate of taxes. Again, it could go longer, but again, for right now, let's just assume this is going to be a 20-year tax. Tax for 20 years. As I mentioned, right, the first year it could hit the rolls, if it did start construction next year, would be 2025. But it wouldn't be done right then yet. So what the appraisal district does is they value it as construction work in progress. So that's why you see it's kind of right there at 40 million bucks. The land associated with that acreage, we're estimating to be valued at 118 million. So you're, for 40,118,000, all right? What we've then done, I've broken out basically the taxes so you can see the impact to the county. The unabated rates is basically all of those others, Poth ISD, the hospital district, et cetera, at about 1.3%. You take the values, the two value components that I mentioned there, multiply by the rate, you get a tax. What I've then done here is I've just broken out, what we're estimating here is a requested 50% abatement for a 10-year period on your rate of 43 cents. Again, this was, I think, before, this was using your 2022 rate, because I know with rate compression and a lot of other things that are being considered, I figured let's go back a year before the session to set that there. But that could obviously be in flux. But that's your 2022 rate, again, applied against that 40 million in that first year. You see there, right, 172,000 in tax. You got rollback taxes and land taxes, which make up a small component of that to get to the total taxes across all the jurisdictions. But again, just kind of focus then on, you kind of see that slight gray shading as we move down a year. And what's happened here is now the facility is assumed to be 100% up and running, right? It's reached commercial operations as of January 1st, 2026, and the full $140 million has hit the tax rolls, right? And so then if you then just kind of skip on over, if you want to see the school taxes and all that, great. But I'm assuming you're probably going to want to pay more attention to is, those two columns that say example abatement percentage and then the county tax. So as you can see there, even under a 50% abatement, under the, your 2022 rates, the county would collect 300,000 to then 250, 200, 180, 140, et cetera, as it depreciates. So it's that total there, but even with a 50% abatement in the first 10 years, if you then account for the next 10 years of tax, the facility of this size and this cost were, again, it's about $4 million in tax benefit to Wilson County. So yes, one of the things, again, that we've looked at is we cannot, right, even when the Chapter 313 program existed before it expired last year, battery storage didn't qualify for that anyways. And so since there's really no way for us to participate in economic development with the school district, the only way we can help mitigate taxes is work with the city first if we're within an incorporated area, which we're not, and then usually then the next highest rates, the county rates. So while, again, this is just an example, really a lot of this was just to get some background. I'd found some old policy drafts, the guidelines and criteria that the county had maybe somewhat considered about putting into place, because there's a very specific process that goes, it doesn't just go from I ask for it and you potentially consider it and grant it. There's a very public process and things that the county has to do so that we could even apply for further consideration. So, but Judge, yeah, this is kind of that breakout of those taxes that I know you had questions about last time that I was here, that I just kind of wanted to explain in more detail.
Because our biggest challenge when we've looked at this before was figuring out at the end of that abatement how that impacts us, because what you're doing, and we also have to balance that with what's the impact to the local taxpayer. Mm-hmm. And so understanding that if you're taxed at the whole thing, obviously, then that provides a great relief to our property tax owners. However, with that said, if you give an abatement, then one of the issues becomes is you're obviously not paying as much tax, so there's not that much reduction. And so what we're trying to balance is and understand is how that affects us. When in your case, you're only asking for 10 years at that 10th year. Mm-hmm. You following where I'm going?
Yes, sir.
here? Yeah,
Yes, sir.
so, because if we lower, if the tax rate is lowered, which it will be,
Mm-hmm.
if we left it at full value, we can, then it hurts us because we're only allowed to increase our tax rate 3.5% every year. And so what happens at that 10th year when all of a sudden all y'all's stuff goes away, and then the tax rate needs to go up more than 3.5 cents to make, or 3.5% to make up what we've lost? That's where we have a lot of questions and issues, because it could potentially hurt us from that standpoint. So that's what we really need to understand, is that at the end of that 10th year, where are we really at? And so, I mean, you know, you have the abated tax rate, assuming that it doesn't change. And we can do our own analysis, but I mean, to me, that's what we would really want to see, is over that 10-year period, you know, if you left the tax rate at what it was, what would it drop to, because we added 140 million to you? So what would you, and then the same thing through the remaining of the 10-year period?
No, and that's a huge consideration, and what we have done, right? And so because that is a big question and there's a lot of unknowns, right? Like what's going to happen the next legislative session as to how you can even set your rates. What I haven't depicted here, but what has actually become kind of more common for counties to do is imagine the same amount, right, that you see here, right? Let's effectively $2 million over the 10-year period, right? Is instead of doing some percentage abatement and the values ever actually hitting your tax rolls, instead, to avoid that issue altogether, what many counties have chosen to do is just abate 100% of it. But don't worry, that's not where we stop, is abate 100% of it just so it never actually hits your tax rolls. And instead, negotiate some payment in lieu of tax, which is just some, you know, back-end number
Well,
that gets back.
That was my next question.
Yep. So because, right, to that point, even if it was 50% abatement, yeah, that first year that hits the rolls, even at, let's call it 70 million of 50 of that, you wouldn't have to figure it into your rate calculations for 2026. But then 2027, you would then have to factor in that 70 million. And then the year after that, the 120 million, you'd have to factor in 60 million, and so on and so forth. And that, depending on the, you know, the size of your tax, you know, your overall tax base and how your mineral values and other things shake up, could introduce, like I said, some complexities that that could potentially be avoided with this kind of payment in lieu of tax.
Yeah, because, I mean, one of our issues with this is just the fact that we don't have a lot of other industry here. It's not like we would expect another company to come in and do something as big as what you all are doing. And so it's hard to come up, it's hard to predict the future, number one. And then number two is I mean, it's only our best guess. I mean, because all of our growth has just been in residential home values. I mean, there's very, very little addition except within the cities that's anything other than residential, and that's not a lot. You know, we haven't attracted Toyota or, you know, any of those other folks here. So that's where we're hesitant, and we want to make sure that we fully understand, you know, those impacts when we get down the road.
Yep.
The other thing
Yes,
that we
sir.
found out in dealing with other desires to be here from electric-based companies was there's only 10 years on the pilot. You can't go to 11 years. That's just the way that it's established in current law. And so you can't try to stretch it out to where you're better protected over a longer time period. It stops with the 10-year max. And you may be one of a half dozen that come to Wilson County in the next 2 years, to where it's great for us to get this influx. And not being ugly, but with the exception of Commissioner King, all the rest of us are probably going to time out of this office and don't want to leave a ticking time bomb for any of our successors. You know, and so how do we take and make sure that we're protecting those who come after us and protecting our home county?
Yep.
Oh,
What I've seen in practice, just to address that, is, again, let's say if it gets to the situation where you're considering, yeah, 3 different ones at different parts, but they've got different timing associated with them. The basis of whatever that pilot still comes out to effectively a 50% abatement. But what you may tell our project is, hey, we're going to do yours in the pilot way, but we're going to do the next one in the way that just goes ahead and hits the tax rolls, right? Like immediately. Sure, we'll incentivize you to help bring that $100 million come along, but ultimately, we want to see some of this start to play out in our tax rates and our budgeting decisions overall. So unfortunately, there's no perfect answer, right? There's no perfect answer, as to this. Each county also has their own kind of unique needs and struggles as you're setting rates and how your values and what your tax base ultimately is, but that's one way that I've done it. Some are just comfortable saying, you know what? At least this guarantees us X amount of dollars from these types of projects for all of these years. Then yeah, maybe we are kicking the can down the road a little bit. But some have kind of trying to balance both interests.
other thing that comes up every time is how do we protect ourselves against, you start this and then you sell off to a municipality and then we get a donut. So do our contracts supersede anything else to where if that happens, we get a single lump sum payout?
Exactly. So you'll find that usually in the recapture provisions of that we're not going to necessarily, the county can't control who they sell it to, but should you sell it to a non-exempt entity, let's say up to that point, you've abated 500 grand in taxes.
Well, it wouldn't be ours, but whoever the company, Samsung.
Exactly.
No.
So they would, whatever that amount is that they have saved via the agreement to that date, all of that then is then due back to the county. And the same can go, there's other protections beyond just selling it to a non-tax exempt entity. It's like, well, what if we just pick up and go in year 12, right?
Right.
Those types of things. There's additional things that protects the county to get, if you haven't gotten your, basically, recouped some of your, costs and things going through this, then the county's protected too.
If you don't get an abatement, are you still gonna build it in?
It is probably the driving force. If it's the ultimate decision, to be determined, but it definitely is probably the top 2 or 3 considerations on this one right now.
Fair enough.
Trying to think if there was any other notes. Again, I would, when we talk about that, the last kind of attachment that I have here is just kind of just a general abatement process. And the reason that I'm bringing this up is that, again, I know that there's probably a lot more questions and considerations, and I know we've been talking about 50%, but we're kind of, getting the cart in front of the horse at this point. Really, our only request of the county is to at least consider kind of just this first portion here. And this is the adoption of guidelines and criteria for the creation of reinvestment zones and to be eligible to participate. So what that is I've got, again, I'm not sure, I think it was like 2021. I think, Saul, I've got a couple copies sitting somewhere.
Yeah, we did one back then because we had a solar development.
Yep. Were those ever actually, I only found the draft online. Do you know if you ever actually made action and implemented those?
I think we adopted that. Or seen something to the contrary?
I have, sorry.
I'll adopt that before.
Yeah, because I think we were gonna,
King, Commissioner.
I mean,
Oh, sorry about that. I'll get it.
we'd have to go back and look, but I want to say that we did, because we had the council, or we hired council to prepare that document at the expense of the abater.
Okay.
That's what that is, and I'm pretty confident that we did, but Crystal, how hard would that be for you to check while we're sitting here? Yeah, it was this. Clearly bore that
And I found some blank dates. It looked like maybe like November of 2020, maybe.
Yes, that was used to pay the attorney that drew up the
I think we
agreement.
did it both times. I wasn't here the first time, but they did it the second time.
Yeah, that's why I said, I think we've adopted something.
And so, yeah, because I didn't see the final copy, that, let's say, that document was put into effect, but they only stay in effect for a 2-year period. And so if they've since expired, right, obviously the court would need to consider that kind of final draft. You can make any changes, but really all that is just says you've got minimum investment targets, you're this type of industry, you know, don't fall next to, you know, sensitive areas within the county, right, where you don't want to do anything. You basically just set out a list of rules and obviously guidelines that an applicant would need to meet. And so what that would then look like is, you know, if that was in effect, then we could take this, right, provide even more detail about the project, continue to answer questions about it, and just have the court consider it, right, for a possible tax abatement while we work through, again, does a pilot make sense? Does a percentage make sense? Something like that. There's obviously public hearings involved with reestablishment of those guidelines. There's then a public hearing as part of, if you look at step 2 of what I've done here, it's called the designation of a reinvestment zone. And while it sounds very, very complicated and a word you probably don't see very often, really all it is just defining the project areas, right, or just the parcel itself. And it says within this particular parcel or area of land, right, the county has designated this area for possible economic development. It doesn't change how the appraisal district values it or handles it if nothing is ever done, but just, if, you know, it just designates this area for that. And then anything within those areas could be eligible for a tax abatement agreement. And so again, there's the guidelines public hearing, there's the reinvestment zone public hearing, which goes into the newspaper as well. And then obviously the final step of the process would be actually considering, you know, the legal document of the abatement agreement terms.
I got a question for Saul, though. You know, I'm not looking for your secrets or anything, but I'm just curious as to how this location was selected.
That's a good question. Our developer, they look at the congestion on that line, and they figured that it would be a good spot. I mean, because there's no substation there, we're going to have to build a substation, so it really could have been anywhere on that line. What we initially tapped it as a solar project, but with the studies that we did, they came up that it wouldn't be good for a solar project, and we reduced the land holdings that we had to this one particular tract, and it was.
So it's basically the fact that this line has a lot of swing between low and high usage. Basically, it's the bottom line, dude.
Does any of this gotta be so far away from or oil and gas getting out there? Because that whole area is nothing.
There's, I mean, if
I mean,
memory
we got
serves, there's,
pump jacks going right here.
yeah, if
I
memory
got pump
serves,
jacks
there's,
all the way
I mean,
around.
there's active production on that track
Matter
that's,
of
That's why I'm
fact, if
asking.
they find the technology to go down another 500 feet, it's gonna be surrounded.
So that's,
I believe, I mean, I think that, I'm pretty sure that parcel's in a unit right now that is, I said, actively producing, so,
yes,
I mean, we are absolutely taking that into effect, or taking that into account.
because right there in front of you, there's wells right there getting punched right now too.
Mhm.
And that whole area is nothing but oil right now. That's why I'm asking that
Oh,
question.
yeah. No, and I think, again, the protections to the landowner, right? This isn't being done with, you know, without their approval, right? Both the surface and mineral estate has to be taken care of and considered when doing this. But again, thankfully, as you can see, that there's solar farms that have been built, right? On active fields, you know, and so the way that they can set that back. This is obviously a little bit easier just on 20 acres, but again, the general answer is yes, it's being considered, and nothing will be done without both the surface and mineral estate, you know, being in agreement.
To the point that we've also worked with an engineering company out of Austin to give us I guess it's an engineering report that says that based on the field rules of this particular, or of the site, we're not going to interfere with any kind of we shouldn't interfere with any oil and gas activity, whereas like they can drill on those lands without our project being in the way.
Okay. Do y'all have any other locations we can look at? Because Cindy, do you want to look at something for emergency management on this?
What kind of, Cindy, I think you need to come up so the people can hear, just share the mic, but what kind of discharge are you talking about?
Well, I mean, most batteries don't just store it, they're gonna have some type of a discharge, you know, it's coming and going, so energy's coming into the batteries, it's at some point has to go back out. We only have one person there, if it is close to some type of a gas line, what if, this is Wilson County after all, what if we have two freaks of nature, we have a spark from the battery storage container and we have a gas leak, if it's a natural gas line or oil gas line, I mean, more site studies with what all is out there close to that and what type of possibilities could come up. Can't say it's not gonna happen, because it happens in Wilson County every day. So
So to
just that.
summarize, not just the concern that the batteries themselves, right, could have an event, but just like the substation equipment, the inverters
Yes.
and all of that, just kind of in general, what is our safety preparedness plan, things that we put into effect?
And that should be followed with emergency management when it's all said and done anyway, and we actually try to have exercises, tabletops to discuss that. We do that with all of the major oil and natural gas companies here in Wilson County, so.
And so when we build, so we will build this site, and we're also going to tap, who's the TSP, Brazos? Is it, I don't know. Anyways, we have to follow their guideline, or they're gonna follow their own guidelines to build the substation. We have to follow their guidelines as well to build the switching stations, and, I mean, it's regulated. So I would imagine that whatever we have to do to be within the letter of the law, we will build it. So,
And I
Yeah.
figured it's just planning,
Sure, sure,
you know, knowing what's out there since it is
sir,
a large area with natural gas lines and.
Absolutely. So we can add that, you know, beyond just kind of the matrix of the fire guidelines that you mentioned that are coming out, just sharing, just, okay, what are, beyond just the batteries, right, what other precautions are we taking, procedures that we follow, et cetera, be glad to share it with your office too.
Perfect.
So
Thank you.
that if you look at it, and got questions or concerns, we can work to address them.
I guess, you know, to her question, so during normal operations, you're not doing a switch in the switch yard. It's part of, that's all handled internally. You've got all your own internal breakers and you need to isolate a battery pack. So there's really no sparks outside except potentially when you're working on a switch outside, correct?
Yes.
Which would be rather infrequently.
That's correct. I apologize, I missed your name, but I can give you my card after this too, and then I can get yours. Just make sure we've got your information, and anything we start putting together about fire safety, we share with our office as well.
And somebody's on this side at all time, 24 hours?
Not at all, not 24/7, but it's always monitored 24/7.
Mr. Stroud, spell your first name for me.
SAUL,
Okay. Wanted to make sure it was,
STROUD.
got the Stroud, we've got that family in the county.
February?
Yeah, it was February 14th.
Don't leave. Please. Yeah, you did.
Yeah, you just have to, I guess, check with the county attorney's office, because I'm pretty sure we adopted that just because we had to be able to go into the negotiations.
And did I hear a date? You said February of 2022? Got it, okay.
We've got a little bit of time. Well, but that was when we engaged the attorneys to assist with that, so it would have been sometime after that, so probably March or April, maybe. We'll just have to go back and do a
Okay.
little research.
And that outside attorney, it was Bracewell?
Bracewell Patterson, right?
Okay.
If I'm not mistaken, I don't know if we, that's the Nueces River Authority that you are looking at right there.
No, well, you would
Because
have,
that's kind of that area.
you would have the Evergreen, since it's in Wilson County, you'd have the Evergreen Underground Water Conservation District.
Yep.
Which part were you talking about?
Just right here for that river authority.
Commissioner King, you can see them, the actual
Yeah.
names. It's the San Antonio River Authority, if you see it over there on kind of the bar chart.
But I,
That's right on that line.
yeah, there's a, yeah, because the southwestern corner, it may be far enough that it's out, if it
might
is in
be.
Sarah, yeah, so, but I mean, to his point, I would double check that, because I do know that when we get over to certain parts of the western county, that those creeks feed into the Nueces.
Got it.
That's why I wanted to point that out, just so we're 100% on it.
I know you're not from around here, but it's not Poth, it's Poth.
Poth? I try and pick up on it. Maybe
That's all
that's
right,
just.
you're not the first one, you won't be the last. Actually, the old timers call it Pote.
Pote?
Pote.
Okay.
That's the Polish pronunciation.
And I think we were gonna tell you last time, but you were in the middle of the agenda and got to leave while we were still going on with court. But anyways.
I stand corrected. No,
No,
I appreciate it.
Whenever
That's
you
one
said
thing
it,
I
go,
try and train myself
"Dadgummit,
on.
We didn't tell him, and
You hear people call Jordantown, and it's not Jordantown.
Jordan.
So,
I was with a client in Louisiana, and she kept again over there, it's parishes, right, not counties and whatever, and she just kept calling them county commissioners, and so it was all good. She got corrected too, but once you learn what,
Yeah, but they got a lot of water and a lot of alligators over there, that's what you gotta worry about.
y'all want to put this on the next agenda for this, or let them do their research for that? They got to bond it first, and they want to get past this point.
Yeah, well, I guess we need to find out if we ever adopted that other agreement. I feel like we did.
Would that pertain to this? That would pertain to that
I
specific?
think so, right?
yes, if they were put into effect, I don't think there's an immediate action that we would ask the Commissioners Court to consider by next meeting. If they weren't, and that's just sitting out there in a final draft form that just never made it on an agenda, then yeah, then we would consider for y'all to just review it. And if you're okay with the form that it's in right now, just approve those to be into effect. That way, following that approval, we could put together an application for your consideration.
Okay. Okay, sir.
Commission, I guess just one question. As that follow-up, should I follow up with you, Commissioner King, your office, Judge Whitman? What would you prefer?
You can follow up with me.
Okay, got it.
Get that going. So if we're coming to the next Commissioners Court,
Yeah.
Yeah, the thing is, to
an
get on the
answer to
next
that.
Commissioners Court, we gotta know by next Wednesday. I don't know that
Correct.
any of us will be ready for that.
yeah, it's,
And technically,
Yeah, or next Tuesday,
yeah,
yeah.
it's coming quick, so.
and y'all know the rules better than I do, but there is a public hearing that is required as part of that. So I think sometimes you have to set the public hearing at one meeting and then wait to the next one to actually hold it.
30 days to
Yep.
get to the next one.
and if we do it at the next meeting, it's gonna take it all into the next year.
I'll follow it.
Yep.
All right, we'll start working on it.
Thank y'all so much.
Sir, thank
It was
you.
great. Thank y'all for making the time this afternoon.
Thanks for being honest
I
with us.
appreciate it, thank you. All right, Commissioners, nothing else, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion.
Wow, that was quick, all right.
I don't know who got it.
Motion made by Commissioner Aiken, seconded by Commissioner King. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, motion passes, we're adjourned.
13:49.